Shortly before midnight on November 17, 1978, the heavy steel back door of a Speedway fast food restaurant swung open into the dark, leaving behind an empty building and a profound mystery. 4 young workers simply vanished into the freezing Indiana night, leaving their personal belongings behind. This unsettling disappearance would eventually expose massive flaws in how local authorities handled major cases. It would reveal a broken system. To understand how this happened, you have to look at the reality of policing in 1978. At the time, local police departments operated as isolated islands. They relied entirely on paper records, physical filing cabinets, and landline telephones. There was no digital database to track suspects. Officers worked within their strict town borders, rarely sharing information with outside departments. When a call came in, dispatchers manually logged the details on physical slips of paper. They handed these notes to patrol officers through a small dispatch window. If an officer found a clue, it stayed in a local evidence room. The process was slow, manual, and highly localized. It was designed for minor thefts and traffic stops, not complex multi-county investigations. This fragmented approach created a massive blind spot for law enforcement. If a suspect committed a crime and simply drove across a county line, the trail often went completely cold. The pursuing agency had no fast way to alert the next town over. Detectives in neighboring cities could be hunting the exact same suspect for months without ever realizing their cases were connected. The town of Speedway, Indiana, sat right in the middle of this fractured network. It was a quiet, tight-knit suburb famous for its massive auto racing track. During the off-season, it was a peaceful community where violent crime was incredibly rare. The local police force was small, dedicated, and accustomed to handling routine neighborhood disputes and minor property damage. Because Speedway police handled mostly minor local infractions, they lacked specialized forensic teams. They also lacked formal protocols for interagency cooperation. When a major incident suddenly crossed their borders, they had no established framework for calling in state investigators for immediate backup. This lack of preparation meant that a massive, complex case would quickly overwhelm their limited local resources. For the families living in these quiet neighborhoods, the illusion of absolute safety was deeply comforting. Parents allowed their teenagers to work late shifts, trusting that the town was secure. They believed their local officers could handle any threat that might appear. The community felt protected by the familiar small-town atmosphere where everyone knew their neighbors and looked out for each other. That fundamental trust was about to be shattered completely. When the news broke that 4 local teenagers were missing, a deep, paralyzing fear gripped the entire town. Parents suddenly looked at quiet streets with intense suspicion. The community was desperate for answers, but the local authorities were simply not equipped to provide the reassurance and swift justice the families demanded. The focal point of this impending tragedy was a popular local hangout on Crawfordsville Road. It was a brightly lit fast food franchise that served as a cornerstone of teenage life in the area. High school students gathered there after football games, and many took their first part-time jobs behind its counters. It was an ordinary, everyday location, entirely unremarkable to anyone passing by. Late-night shifts at this specific burger chef were usually quiet and predictable. The crew consisted of teenagers and young adults, scrubbing grills and counting the day's receipts. They played music over the kitchen speakers and looked forward to the weekend. It was a safe, enclosed environment where the biggest concern was usually a broken milkshake machine or a missing spatula. Inside the restaurant that night, the fluorescent lights hummed loudly over freshly mopped tile floors. The strong smell of industrial cleaner mixed with the lingering scent of fried food and hot grease. Stainless steel counters gleamed under the bright ceiling panels. The dining room was completely empty, with chairs neatly stacked on top of the tables for the night. But in the back of the kitchen, something was deeply wrong. The heavy metal exit door, which led directly to a dark, secluded alleyway, stood slightly ajar. It let the freezing November wind sweep into the warm kitchen. This open door was a silent, chilling indicator of a sudden, unnatural departure, leaving investigators to wonder what could have forced them out. Corporate protocols for closing a burger chef required a strict, unchanging sequence of events. The manager was supposed to lock all public entrances exactly at closing time. Then they would empty the cash registers, count the money, and secure it inside a heavy floor safe. Finally, the crew would turn off the main power switches before leaving together. 4 young employees were tasked with executing this exact routine on that Friday night. It was a mundane, highly structured system designed to secure the building and protect the workers. The manager had the keys, and the crew had their specific cleaning assignments. If the system was followed correctly, the restaurant would be a locked fortress until the morning shift arrived. When a fellow employee arrived hours later, they found this strict procedure completely abandoned. The heavy floor safe was wide open. 2 empty money bags lay discarded on the tile floor. In the employee break room, the staff's heavy winter coats were still hanging on their hooks. It was freezing outside, yet no one had taken their jacket. The cash registers contained only loose change, wiped clean of any paper bills. A single purse belonging to one of the missing girls sat completely untouched on a back counter. These specific details signaled to anyone watching that the standard closing procedure had been violently interrupted. The workers had not simply walked off the job and gone home. The immediate consequence of this missing crew was widespread confusion, which quickly led to a catastrophic investigative failure. Because no bodies were immediately found, early responders did not treat the restaurant as the site of a violent crime. Believing it was just a case of petty theft by runaway teens, police allowed the morning crew to enter the building and prepare for business. By scrubbing the floors and wiping down the counters, well-meaning employees inadvertently destroyed crucial forensic evidence. They threw away trash, washed surfaces, and permanently compromised the crime scene. This devastating procedural error destroyed any chance of finding early physical clues, setting the stage for a decades-long search for the perpetrators of the tragic burger chef murders. The true weight of the situation became clear to the community 2 days later. On Sunday afternoon, a group of hikers walking through a remote wooded area in neighboring Johnson County made a devastating discovery. They found the bodies of the 4 missing workers still wearing their brown and orange uniforms. The fading hope that the teenagers had simply taken the restaurant cash and run away was instantly shattered. For the families of the victims, this sudden escalation from a missing persons case to the murders of 4 young people was unbearable. They realized that while police were treating the disappearance as a minor theft, their children had already been taken out to the woods and killed. The heartbreak was heavily magnified by the knowledge that the initial response had been so casual. The discovery of the bodies shifted the entire focus of the investigation, but it also introduced a massive new hurdle. The abduction had occurred at the restaurant in Speedway, which was located in Marion County. However, the crime itself ended more than 20 miles away in a completely different jurisdiction. This meant multiple police departments now had to work together to piece the events back together. Instead of a unified front, the divided geography caused immediate friction. Local agencies lacked basic systems for interagency communication, meaning detectives in one county often had no idea what clues were being uncovered in the other. This lack of cooperation created blind spots, allowing critical hours to pass while different departments argued over who was officially in charge of the case. Out in the Johnson County woods, the physical reality of the second crime scene presented its own massive challenges. The bodies were scattered across a rugged, uneven landscape, heavily covered in brush and fallen leaves. Unlike a confined indoor space, this wide-open environment offered very little protection for whatever physical clues the killers might have left behind. By the time investigators secured the perimeter, weather and natural elements had already begun to degrade the area. Footprints in the dirt were fading, and any potential fingerprints on the victims were exposed to the damp air. This outdoor decay compounded the earlier compromise at the restaurant, leaving detectives with 2 heavily damaged locations and almost no reliable physical evidence. This catastrophic investigative failure eventually forced a permanent shift in how local law enforcement operated. The glaring mistakes made during the Burger Chef case exposed the desperate need for strict, standardized rules regarding early crime scene preservation. Police departments across Indiana realized they could no longer assume a scene was safe just because a body was not immediately visible. The disaster also pushed the state toward modern interagency task forces. Recognizing that isolated departments could not handle complex, multi-county crimes alone, law enforcement leaders began building frameworks for mandatory cooperation. They established unified communication channels and shared filing systems, ensuring that future investigations would not be derailed by territorial disputes and poor information sharing. Beyond the police reforms, the tragedy triggered an immediate overhaul of workplace safety protocols across the fast food industry. Restaurants recognized the extreme vulnerability of young employees working late-night shifts with large amounts of cash. Managers quickly installed heavy drop safes that regular staff could not open, removing the primary incentive for late-night robberies. Companies also mandated that back doors remain locked at all times after dark, strictly prohibiting employees from taking out the trash until the morning. For the families of Jane Freet, Ruth Shelton, Mark Flemons, and Daniel Davis, these industry changes offered a small measure of safety for future workers. Yet they were forced to live with the reality that these simple rules came too late for their own children. Decades later, the case remains officially unsolved, frozen in time by those crucial early errors. The lasting memory of that night always returns to the empty restaurant before the sun came up. A single untouched purse sitting quietly on a back counter remains a haunting symbol of a routine shift that suddenly stopped and a truth that was swept away before anyone knew to look for it. Subscribe for a new story every week.